who is the greatest among you. Let him be servant of all. Thank you once again for tuning in to Building Great Leaders broadcast. We are today going to take on a topic that is a life-touching life. To me, there are 5 great principles in an Old Testament story. And we take those 5 principles as principles of discipling, steps that can be made. Paul said the things that were written aforetime were written for our learning and our admonition. And I believe the story we'll look at today from 2 Kings chapter 4 will certainly be one of those for great learning and great admonition. So turn to 2 Kings chapter 4. We'll be looking at a story that has 4 elements in this drama. The story has a dead child, a desperate parent, a defective servant, and a dedicated servant. And as we examine each one of these, we'll see the story behind each of their lives and what was characteristic and what made them usable or not usable for God's glory. We pick up the story in 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 8, and it's dealing with the Shunammite as Elisha was passing through that area. And it fell on a day, 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 8, it fell on a day that Elisha passed the Shunem, where there was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And it was so that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. And she said unto her husband, Behold, now I perceive this is a holy man of God, which passes by us continually. Now, quite a significant statement to me. Here's the Shunammite. She and her husband were without child, yet they lived there in this area. But Elisha and his servant Gehazi would pass through it as Elisha was on his itinerant ministry. And she makes a statement, I perceive that this is a holy man of God. Now, I want you to notice, she did not say, I perceive these are holy men of God. And I'm going to point out later in this drama why I think she did not say these are holy men of God. She said, this is a holy man of God. Verse 10, let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall. And let us set for him there a bed, a table, a stool, a candlestick, and it shall be, when he comes to us, that he shall turn in there. And it fell on the day that he came there, and he turned into the chamber and lay there. So here they're coming through, and we got the idea of a prophet chamber. A lot of churches now are building prophet chambers. A lot of families have homes, and they say, we also have a prophet chamber. My wife and I stay in a lot of prophet chambers in homes. And basically, it's an extra room. Perhaps the children are grown. They turn it into a place with a bed, a table, not a candlestick, but obviously a light. But that's where that principle came from. And she then is being so gracious. And then Elisha tells Gehazi, go and ask them, how can we bless them? In other words, they have been a blessing to us. How can we bless them? And so Gehazi goes, and she basically says that we have been without child, and my husband is old. So then Elisha calls her in verse 15, and when he called her, she stood at the door, and he said, about this season, according to the time of life, thou shalt embrace a son. And she said, Nay, my Lord, thou man of God, do not lie to thine handmaid. And the woman conceived and bare a son at that season that Elisha had said unto her, according to the time of life. And when the child was grown, it fell in a day that he went out to his father, to the reaper. So now God honored that home with a child, gave them a son. I'm sure there was a lot of excitement regarding that, and now the boy got old enough to go out into the field to work with Dad. I'm not sure what his age was. I don't think he was a large teenager by now, but I think he was old enough to go in the field and work with Dad. And he said unto his father in verse 19, my head, my head. And he said to a lad, carry him to his mother. So this boy is out, probably a sunstroke, maybe midday, hot sun, working out in the field, and started crying that his head was hurting. The father said, carry him home to his mother. And when he had taken him, brought him to his mother, sat on her knees till noon, and then died. So now we have element number one of this drama. We have a dead child. Secondly, we see a desperate parent. Here was the child of promise. Here was the child that they had so wanted to have, and now we're so delighted to have him growing and working with Dad. He comes in. I'm sure Mom is hugging, probably praying over him. And then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door upon him and went out. And she called unto her husband and said, send me, I pray thee, one of the young men, one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God and come again. And he said, wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it shall be well. So the husband said, why are you going now? It's not new moon or Sabbath. I don't think this wife told her husband that the child had died. I think she had the child put on the bed of the man of God. I think she left to go look for Elisha. She wanted to be in touch with the man in whom she believed God was working. What a lesson that is for us. That we should so evidence the working of God in our life that people who get in a desperate strait know where to look for help. And so she got the donkey and a servant and drove forward. And she said, don't slack your driving till I tell you. So she went and came unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said to Gehazi his servant, behold, yonder is that Shunammite. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. So here, if you could picture this, Elisha standing with Gehazi, and Elisha looks and said, that looks like that Shunammite woman coming. Gehazi run to her and ask her, what is going on? How is it with her? And so he goes and says, is it well with thee? Now, how are you personally? Is it well with thy husband? How is it with your partner? Is it well with the child? How is it with you as a parent? And she lied to him. She said, it is well. And we'll learn something. People will not be honest with people they do not trust. I don't think this woman trusted Gehazi. People are not going to bear their heart, their deepest sorrows and deepest griefs with someone they don't trust. She wanted to talk to the man of God. So she left and got a hold of the man of God and took Elisha by the feet. And here's Gehazi trying to pull her away. And Elisha says, let her alone. Her soul is vexed within her. What a statement. I wonder when we go to church on Sunday and we go to our pew and we look across the auditorium and we see people well dressed, sitting there properly, holding their Bible. But we have no idea about the vexation of soul that is going on in the hearts of some of these people. The person sitting right next to you, right next to your family, might have such a heavy heart burden that there is a subtle anger against God growing in that soul. But there is vexation of soul. And Elisha said, the Lord has hid it from me. And then she tells him, the son that came is dead. Did you deceive me? And Elisha tells Gehazi, Gehazi, take my staff, run, go lay it on the face of the child. Remember that staff that Elijah had and then Elisha had. They saw many miraculous things done. But they're about to learn it wasn't the power in the stick. It was in the one who carried that stick. And so Gehazi runs, lays the staff on the face of the child in verse 31. And he said, but there was neither voice nor hearing. And he comes back and tells Elisha, the child is not awake. Now we see, suddenly the man of God comes in, and now we begin to see the 5 principles that I believe are applicable for life touching life. Number 1, we see Elisha comes in. Well, the child was laid on the bed. Number 1, he went in. That's the principle of proximity. Number 1 in problem solving. Number 1 in lifting the heart of someone who is in grief is you go to where that need is. The best example for us would be the person of Christ himself. Philippians 2. Though God, he did not glory in equality with God, but took on him the form of a servant, and being made in likeness of man, became obedient to death, even the death of the cross. What did he do? Because we were born with a sin problem. We were dead in trespasses and sin. And he came to where the problem was. He left the Father's throne to be born in a feed trough. Lived that sinless life. 100% man, 100% God. But he came where the problem was. The way a need is going to be met is you don't ignore the problem. You go where that need is. You go where that hurt is. You go where that problem is. How many times we have just ignored people who have been in deep, deep distress. In a family, you cannot let a child lock himself in his bedroom and not communicate. You go where that problem is. A husband and wife cannot get into a division and the husband sleeps on the couch and the wife sleeps in the bedroom. Go where the problem is. You cannot live in that separation, no matter what that relationship is. Go where that problem is. That's step number 1 and be an example of dying to self to be alive unto someone else. And then it says he shut the door. I put that as the principle of privacy. And here we find that Elisha goes in and he shuts the door and goes to where that problem is, because here is a hurting mother, a desperate need. And yet when we look at our churches and we look at people, we are happy to make declarations publicly. We are happy to teach groups. But I wonder, is there a time when we just need to get one-on-one with someone whose heart is so heavy, heart is broken, or perhaps a desperate strait, as we see this mother's son now dead on that bed. And he went in and he shut the door. I have a story here. It's a gift called Love. This was first published by the Word Publishers in 1986 under the title, Who Changed the Price Tags? It was given to me by Dr. A.A. Baker, Buzz Baker, who is president then of A.A. Baker Communications. And I have used this in many educator conferences. I've used this in many different venues because it so illustrates the desperate need for us to have life-touching life. This is a story of a young man. And let me read it as it's been handed to me. And now you know the rest of the story. These now the famous words heard by millions of Americans every day as they conclude the broadcast of one of our nation's finest spokesmen, Mr. Paul Harvey. The story that follows has never been broadcast on his program, probably never will, but it should be. For if one could write with the pen of angels, he could never write a story as beautiful as this one. A true story. A story about love. It begins, he was not a very good student. No, let's be honest. He was actually a very, very poor student. In fact, to be totally honest, he appeared to be a very poor person. Let's put it this way. In the who's who of life, Teddy wouldn't even have been included in the appendix. When he came to school, which wasn't that often, Miss Thompson, his teacher, would never see the real Teddy. He was always hidden behind the musty, torn clothes, the hair that had never been seen soap or brush, and the shroud of a mysterious, painful home life. He had one of those, generic faces, nothing special, except for an occasional amount of dirt and an unusual amount of frowns. It could have been the face of any one of 1,000 fifth-grade boys. When Miss Thompson did have to speak to him, he would never look up, would never change expression, would never answer with more than 3 or 4 words at a time. He didn't seem to be very intelligent. He didn't seem to be very good, and he didn't seem to care. He was just hard to like. When Miss Thompson said she loved all her students, deep down she was not being completely truthful. Whenever she graded Teddy's papers, she got a certain perverse pleasure out of putting X's next to the wrong answers. And when she took turns allowing one student each day to run errands for her, somehow it never seemed to get around to being Teddy's turn. He just couldn't be trusted, she said. He couldn't afford the time out of class. She said he would really want to do it. Maybe he wouldn't. She said it, but she really didn't believe it. She knew better. She had his school record. She knew more about him than she really wanted to admit. School records read, first grade, Teddy Stoller does poorly, but seems to want to do better. There are problems at home. Second grade, Teddy has shown little, if any, improvement. He could do better, never met his father. Mother is mysteriously ill. Third grade, Teddy seems to reject our attempts to help him. Discipline problems probably result from depression. His mother died this year. Fourth grade, Teddy needs to be held back. Recommend psychological evaluation. Father is hardly ever home, shows no interest at all. When Christmas finally rolls around, Miss Thompson class, the 5th grade that year, of course, as tradition had it, all the boys and girls were expected to bring gifts for their teacher. All that is except for Teddy, and no one, especially Miss Thompson, expected him to bring a gift. But he did. She blinked her eyes in disbelief and checked again. Sure enough, right there at the bottom of a pile of brightly wrapped presents that reached halfway up the chalkboard was a small gift wrapped in part in an old wrinkled grocery sack and held together with what appeared to be some decayed muddy kite string. Written with pencil on the sack were the simple words, "To Miss Thompson from Teddy." She began to open gifts to the oohs and the ahs of the other children, consciously avoiding that one little gift and almost wishing it would go away. And there was a beautiful little golden apple paperweight for her desk, a lovely red pine cone, and a porcelain vase another mother had brought back from Japan, and many wonderful presents. Then finally there was that one more to be opened. It hadn't gone away. She had saved the least till the last, and she shouldn't have. For already the students were beginning to snicker. She cut the kite string, quickly unwrapped the grocery sack, and out fell a tarnished, gaudy rhinestone bracelet, with at least a third of the rhinestones missing. The smirks and giggles became more noticeable at this point. Miss Thompson at least had enough sense to quiet them down. Then she said, "My, this is a very, very unique bracelet, isn't it, class?" And the class answered with a somewhat sarcastic, "Yes, ma'am." The party finally ended with nobody really realizing that Teddy was there. When the bell rang, they filed quickly out the door for Christmas break, all talking and no one listening, as usual, with the case of excited children. But Teddy lingered behind, pretending to have trouble collecting all the Christmas candy which everyone in class had brought to share with another. Though really, how hard could it have been to collect only 3 pieces? Finally, when the coast was clear, he slowly maneuvered his way to her desk. This had never happened before, and Miss Thompson was almost frightened as she said, "What's the matter, Teddy?" Then he actually raised his eyes and looked at her and said softly, "Did you really like my present?" Oh, yes, Teddy, I really did, she replied, fully intending to ask God's forgiveness later. Then, to seem more convincing, she picked up the bracelet and slid it gently around her wrist. For the first time, Miss Thompson saw Teddy smile. Not a big smile, but it definitely was a smile. And he started out the door. He turned and said, Miss Thompson, I wanted to get you something nicer, but the only jewelry my mother left me was this bracelet. And her bracelet really looks pretty on you, too. Teddy walked away. Miss Thompson began to cry. Oh, she had cried over her students many times, but never had she cried over Teddy. She had never cried like she cried that day. When the students all returned from Christmas break, they were greeted by a new teacher. Oh, she had the same name, but everything else changed. For you see, she had received a gift that changed her life, and now she was determined to give a gift that would change the lives of others, a gift called love. She would love the Marys and the Bobs and the Debbies in life, but especially the Teddys. Well, Teddy soon began to respond to his new teacher. His grades improved, his appearance improved, and later Miss Thompson would say that he became the best classroom errand boy she ever had. By the time the school year ended, he caught up with most of the students in class. Years passed. She didn't hear from Teddy. Then one day a letter arrived. It read, Dear Miss Thompson, I'll be graduating from high school in a few days, second in my class. I wanted you to be the first to know. 4 more years went by without a word. Then another letter. Dear Miss Thompson, the university hasn't been easy, but I've loved it. They just told me I'll be graduating first in my class. I wanted you to be the first to know. 4 years later went by without a word, and finally another letter. Dear Miss Thompson, as of today, I am Teddy Stollard, MD. How about that? I wanted you to be the first to know. But the best news is I'm getting married, and I would like you to sit where my mother would sit if she were here. You are the only family I have. And I'm not going to finish the rest of this, but the point is, Teddy Stollard went on to be very, very successful in life. And it took the love of someone one-on-one. It took the love of a teacher with a vision for the entire class and for those hurting ones. Here we find Elisha. Proximity, he went in. Secondly, he shut the door, that privacy. How many people need that personal touch from us? You look right now, somebody in your life, someone you know needs a touch from you, a personal attention. And then it says, and he prayed. Principle of prayer. Principle of proximity. Principle of privacy. Principle of prayer. It should be a given that we would be having the names of those that we carry as concerns on our heart in our regular, faithful prayer list. And yet, many times we just go on in life as though God did not exist, as though prayer were not an important part of our life. And Elisha went in and prayed. And then it says he went up and lay upon the child, put his mouth upon his mouth, eyes upon his eyes, hands upon his hands, and stretched himself upon the child. And the flesh of the child waxed warm. He literally gave himself to the child. Life touching life. And what a picture that is of Christ literally becoming flesh that we might have our lives touched. There is a price tag to be paid. Not only proximity and not only privacy and prayer, but also a price tag involved in building the lives of people. Have we become too self-centered? Have we become too careless to even notice that there are people who are really, really hurting or really in need? But because we have wrapped ourselves around our own little world, we have not picked up on those needs. And yet Christ gave himself willingly that we might have life. And as Elisha, as this Old Testament picture, because he had the power of God on him as a prophet. He died to himself long before. And therefore, he was able to have life, to touch life into another as a prophet of God. Now, why was Gehazi not usable? Why did the Shunammite not trust Gehazi? Well, I think we'll find out in the next chapter, which we will not take time to read. But you know the story of the healing of Naaman, this little Jewish girl who was a slave girl from Israel there in the home of Naaman, being a servant. Naaman with leprosy. The little girl said, there's a man in my home area that could heal. Plans are made. Naaman packs up, goes down for the healing, brings all of these gifts and rewards in this wagon, riches to pay for the healing, to express gratitude for the healing. First answer, Naaman's offended and leaves in anger. Servant said, do what the prophet says. Goes into Jordan 7 times, comes flesh as clean as a baby. He insists on paying Elisha. Elisha said, no, I don't want that. But Gehazi, because his motivation was not pure. Gehazi was in it for himself, saw what Elisha rejected. He followed Naaman. And in following Naaman, he misrepresented the heart of his master for personal gain. I believe that's why that Shunammite woman, I think she sensed something that was phony about him. That's why she didn't say, I perceive these are holy men of God. You know, when we serve God, there has to be a pure motivation. When we are servants, there has to be a pure heart in that service. We cannot be in it for ourselves. We cannot be in it for self-glorification. We cannot be in it for self-gain. We have to be there to be servants for God's glory, building great leaders. Greatness is serving. And Elisha had modeled that from the time of his surrender till that very hour. And last of all, we see principle of perseverance. He did not give up. Verse 35, then he returned, walked in the house to and fro, went up, stretched himself upon him, and the child sneezed 7 times. And he opened his eyes, and he called Gehazi and said, call this Shunammite. So he called her. When she came in unto him, he said, take up thy son. She went in, fell at his feet, bowed herself to the ground, took up her son, and went out. Perseverance. Be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as ye know your labor is not in vain in the Lord. And Elisha didn't give up. He didn't quit just because the child got warm. He stayed until there was life. In our discipling, we have to practice going where the needs are. We have to practice many times privacy. Not just a group, but the private times. He prayed. That's a given. He paid the price, literally gave himself to that child. But then it didn't stop till there was life. Why? Because there was life in him. What a difference that makes. Is that life in me? Can I touch another person with the power of God that's on my life? God, teach us to love you supremely and teach us to love others with the same love you loved us. Teach us to be sensitive to the needs of people. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.